Secret Circle.
Welcome to the Secret Circle with me, Dr. Luke Deckard, the podcast where I chat with authors, filmmakers, musicians, and more about the art of their craft and let you in on some of their secrets. Today's guest is author Jamie West, and today we're talking about his debut novel, Death on the Pier, writing murder mysteries, and working in London's theatre lands. Without further ado, let's bring Jamie on. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Welcome to me. Yeah.
Welcome to you. Really glad to have you on and chat about Death on the Pier. I really enjoyed reading it. It's a really fun book and sort of kind of took me by surprise. I didn't really know what I was expecting going in. When I read people's books, I don't necessarily deep dive. I sort of just read a little bit of the back and then just kind of go in. I don't tend to look at reviews. I don't tend to look at anything in advance because I just want to be surprised for good or bad. But
yeah, 100%.
This was good.
Oh,
this was
cool.
good. I really enjoyed your book, your writing style. So I'm excited to talk with you about it today. And I'm equally excited that my kid has decided to actually fall asleep because she was screaming about 10 minutes ago. And I was like, this is going to be really awkward recording if I've got a screaming child in the background, but luckily she's finally drifted to sleep.
Fantastic. I've got a snoozing dog in the background as well, so we'll see which one gets interrupted by noise first. Yeah.
Anything can happen. So one thing I ask all my writers who come on the podcast is more of a philosophical question first, and that is, why is it that you write? Why do you have the need or the compulsion to write and tell stories?
It's weird, isn't it? I have no idea, because there's always been something there, because way back when I was like a teenager and doing my performing arts BTEC course, which is the equivalent of like an A-level, I was always creating stories for everyone else. So I was the one that used to kind of take the lead. It's like, here's what we should do. And then everyone was like, yeah, okay. And then I ended up writing a few little plays, like a few scenes. And then for the end of year show, quite ambitiously, I wrote an entire full-length musical, songs included. So there's obviously something in me that wants to tell stories, whatever they may be. But I'm a strong believer that different stories have different forms and kind of suit different things. You know, certain stories really suit film or TV. They fit a 60-minute segment or a 90-minute segment, you know, classically. And some things have to be a book. And I'm fascinated by books because they're so immersive. They're so personal to each reader. And it's almost the closest thing to theatre you can get, because in a theatre, you're obviously asked to go quite a long way to imagining what's going on. You know, sometimes you've got some set, but a lot of the time you're in a kind of black box. You've got to imagine a lot of what's going on in the background. So books are really that, but even more intimate in a way. So I'm always been fascinated by books, and they're comforting because of that. And they're so personal to each reader. So yeah, books are fascinating. And I was like, let's do it. This story I've come up with, this murder mystery story, even though it's set in the theatre, it really felt obviously like a book. And I was like, let's do a book and get it down. And I've loved doing that, basically.
Did you consider Death on the Pier as a script, as a theater, to perform in theater, or was it always, yes, this has to be a book?
No, it was always going to be a book. But since it's been done, I have, you know, you sort of imagine, well, how would this be a TV show? Someone buy the rights, please. That'd be great. Or, you know, could it be a play? Because obviously, whenever you adapt things for a different form, it has to be an adaptation. There's sort of no way that this book and the mechanics of it, when you see how it works, there's sort of no way that would translate directly to a TV show, perhaps. So that's why it has to be a book. And there's a few other murder mysteries like that. Sometimes you read the book and it's like, this works because I can't see what's going on. It's easy to hide stuff from readers in a book, whereas on a TV show or a film, you know, you're pointing a camera at something, you have to show what it is. Which is why a few of those Agatha Christie ones where disguises and stuff are involved, they don't always come off on the TV screen.
No.
So like, well, that person's clearly wearing a disguise.
That is true. That is true. And I think about the I really like the Granada Sherlock Holmes series with Jeremy Brett. But there are a few of those where I'm like, this was more fun in a short story.
Yeah,
um,
exactly. Yeah,
but
yeah.
hey, eventually Mousetrap has to leave, and why not replace it with your play?
Well, yeah, exactly. You never
You know,
know. I mean, yeah, I don't know if Mousetrap's leaving anytime soon. They do.
I
I mean,
mean, it's not.
they've gone up to 9 shows a week. I didn't even know there was that much. It's really had in the last few years that show's had not a revival because it's the exact
Yeah.
same show, but I don't know the way they've done the marketing and stuff. It's more popular than it's ever been.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. It's in like, I mean, I've lived in London since like 2011. I've never seen it. Never seen it. I've never really cared to see it. I'm not a big Agatha Christie fan. I hold my hands up to that. But yeah, I've never. But what's interesting though is even though I've not seen it, people talk about it all the time, but I still don't know the twist. It
Yeah,
is one of
it's
those weird
amazing, isn't it?
things that like it. You almost feel like that play feels like it should have a Darth Vader "I am your father" moment that everybody knows, but for some reason, somehow this play manages to just not be spoiled for people. It's bizarre.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so so you grew up with a fascination for storytelling, fascination for theater. When did you sort of begin to kind of conceive a Death on the Pier and begin that journey of writing the book?
it's it's fun because the theatre aspect of the book is so ingrained with what the book is, but
Yeah.
it didn't come out of the theatre originally. Originally, it came from the pier, bizarrely,
Oh.
because I was looking for, we're always looking for a better closed circle mystery than, an isolated island, because it's always
Yes.
an isolated island. So it's like, and a pier is one of those things. There's only one way off and on it. Once you're on
Yes.
it, you can't get off without anyone seeing you. So I was like, well, this
Yeah.
seems to be a good place to set a
Definitely.
murder mystery. And it must have, I was wandering up and down Brighton Pier or some pier,
Hmm.
and that idea popped into my head. And then as I started looking around, I've got a bit of a hobby for seeking out lost theatres because I'm fascinated by all the hundreds of theatres that have disappeared in the last
Yes.
100 years or so.
Yes.
And I discovered it only disappeared in 1980, the early 1980s.
Wow, man.
But there was a theatre on the end of Brighton Pier. And then as
Yeah.
soon as saw that and learned that, everything else just fell into place. The idea of having a murder mystery
Yeah.
playwright, his relationship with the police detective, all the characters, the plot, it all kind of just fell into place in one
Yeah.
go. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that's a great idea. And it sort of kicked it around for a while.
Yeah.
And then when we all got sent home during COVID from our productions, I was like, well, I sort of, did a few other things at the time, trying to work out what to do with the time. And then
Yeah.
about halfway through that incredibly long period of not working, I was like,
Yeah.
you know what, let's do this book because I don't need anything
Yeah.
to write this book. I've got my
Yes.
laptop, I've got a text editor, I just have to put the words in. And
Exactly.
it was a really fun process to do and get down, and actually sort of quite easy because, like I said, the idea of kind of be knocking around in there for
Yeah.
such a long time.
Yeah. I like that. You mentioned earlier that you have a love for old theaters, and anyone who has followed your TikTok or your Instagram, you do these really fun videos where you walk around the theaters that you're in, and you give a lot of history. Um, I quite love that. What's the one of the most fascinating theaters that you've been in? Like the one that just sort of, when someone says, "What's that theater that stands out to you the most?" What's that theater, and why?
Um, Gosh, there's probably a couple actually.
Mm.
My One of my favorite theaters was the first theater I ever worked in professionally, which is the London Palladium,
Hmm.
which is an incredible theatre with an insane amount of history.
Yeah.
With Judy Garland and the Beatles, and it was on our screens. Well, not our screens, but for maybe our parents' generation, it was on the screens every night and Sunday night at London Palladium.
Yeah.
That kind of iconic program. So that always had an incredible atmosphere to it, and you can
Mm.
feel the history of these places when
Yeah.
you stand on that stage. You can just feel it. But from a kind of theatre engineering point of view,
Mm.
I loved working at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, which is
Mm.
huge. And when I was there, it still had all the water powered machinery
Oh wow.
substage. And I was very lucky enough to sneak in before it all got removed. They sort of did a demonstration, and I sort of blagged my way in because I had to see this stuff, this Victorian engineering
Yes.
moving for one last time, and
Yeah.
it was amazing. So I think in terms of theatre history, that theatre Royal Drury Lane is,
Yeah.
you know, amazing, and supposedly the most haunted place, the haunted
Oh.
theatre in the UK anyway. So that was
What's the
fun.
ghost story? What's the ghost story there?
Well, there's so many. There's I'm gonna forget all of the
It's
names,
all right.
but before the run of Miss Saigon,
Mm.
apparently everyone was on stage getting their picture taken, and they saw, I think it's the Grey Lady, wander across the back of the circle and disappear into the wall. And
Amazing.
apparently everyone saw this. Um, and it's one of those things that is supposed to be like a good luck charm. And that was the
Oh.
longest running show. After that, it went on to be the longest running show that that theatre ever had. But my personal ghost story, which is
Yes.
a bit ridiculous, it was Dan Leno, who was a performer, used to kind of douse himself in lavender scent
Yeah.
because he was a bit incontinent. So it kind of, took the smell away basically. But one day we were doing checks at work, and I was like, I can smell it. I can smell the lavender. It's here. Like, is this happening? Is this an experience? What I
Yeah.
didn't realize is when they do the backstage tours there, they go around in advance first and spray a bit of lavender in the air. And but I wasn't aware of this, but I was completely convinced for about 2 minutes, and everyone was egging me on. They were like, "Oh no, you're joking, aren't you?" So yeah, I was like completely taken in by that. So yeah, if you go on the tour, they will try and convince you.
Oh my god, that is hilarious. So then do you think that some of these theaters are actually haunted, or is it just all in people's minds?
I think I was saying to someone at work the other day, theaters are weird, and I don't know if it's
Mm.
because I'm over romantic about theaters,
Yeah.
or if it's just the architecture that tricks you. When you stand on a stage and look out in an auditorium, it doesn't feel empty, even though there's no one in the seats. And whether
Yes.
that's just because the seats look like people, I guess, or kind of resemble where
Mm.
people would be, they don't feel empty.
Yeah.
And if ghosts do exist, again, I'm not particularly a believer, but I feel
Mm.
like theaters might be the place where they are
Mm.
because there's so many emotions you feel in a
Yeah.
theater, not only as an actor, but the audience. You go through a huge range of emotions.
Yeah.
Um, and they're also really personal places. Everyone
Mm.
remembers their first trip to the theater.
Yeah.
And at once, when there are variety palaces and music halls, a lot of people would have met there for the first time that have gone there on a date. There's so much, as well as the shows and the buildings themselves, there's so much personal history locked up in these places as well. So
Yeah.
I feel like all of those memories kind of add up to something.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's fascinating. I love a good like ghost story. Would you ever write a theater ghost story?
Well, actually, it's quite I always there's that rule, isn't there, in the rules of murder mystery? You're never supposed to resort to ghosts, but it would be a fun
Mm.
thing to play with, wouldn't it?
Yes, because who was it? It was SS Van Dyne and his rules, and what's Jonathan Knox or Joseph Knox, his rules of crime fiction. These dudes wrote these rules, and I think other people had some. I think like Dorothy Sayers as well. They all broke the rules every time. They never stuck to their rules. Like Agatha Christie broke the murder of whatever Ackroyd, that where it's
Yeah.
it's the killer is the whole time. Spoiler alert. Sorry, folks. It's a good thing I haven't seen Mousetrap.
Yeah.
I'm the loose cannon. Um, yeah, no, but those rules are meant to be broken and meant to have fun with. And for example, like Ben Arnovich's books, which if you've read his stuff, it's crime fiction meets the world of Harry Potter, and I love that. Those are so fun. So I think you could do a good ghostly theater novel, even if the ghost turns out to be some sort of Scooby-Doo mask reveal. It's
Well,
still
exactly. It's all you need is the characters to believe in it, don't you? And then
exactly.
there's somewhere to go, isn't there? So yeah.
Exactly. So growing up, because your book, I would kind of put it more in like the vein of like golden age style crime fiction, really traditional British fiction in one sense. Um, so I'm curious, who were some or are some of your favorite golden age writers, if any?
What's funny is I'm not like a widely read reader in crime fiction until recently. I read a lot of
Interesting.
what's coming out,
Yeah.
but I think growing up in the UK, um, crime on TV, murder mystery on TV is a
Yep.
huge British institution. Even actually, in theatres, I suppose,
Yeah.
it's still a lot of touring shows around the smaller venues. Certainly, in the UK, there's a lot of murder mystery plays going on still. So it's kind of this British huge tradition. And
Yeah.
I grew up with obviously the Poirot TV series,
Of
but
course.
also
Yes.
Jonathan Creek, which was so good at those mechanical
Yeah.
locked room kind of mysteries and seemed to be able to churn them out
Yeah.
series after series. And I think that was a real influence on me and the kind of stories that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
But I didn't come to Agatha Christie until much later in life. I think
Mm.
my first encounter with Agatha Christie was actually through her plays. I was
Mm.
involved in an amateur dramatic society, and one of the first plays we did was her play Spider's Web, which is still my
Mm.
favorite play. I love
Mm.
it. So I came to Agatha Christie and her books a lot later, even though I watched them on TV. I hadn't actually read the books,
Yeah.
um, which I think is good because I come without all of that baggage that a lot of people kind of misremember from when they
Yeah.
read Agatha Christie when
Yeah.
they were young. And it's so fascinating reading those books now. And a lot of them, some of them read just like modern crime fiction
Oh yeah.
now. It's kind of insane. So yeah, kind of holding on to that because I do find you often stop people in the street and say Agatha Christie, and the first thing they'll say to you is, "Oh, Colonel Mustard in the library with the revolver." Or whatever. And
Yes.
of course, that's clued. Like her name has become so
Yes.
synonymous with murder
Yeah.
mystery. It's become a synonym for murder mystery
Yeah.
when she was really doing her own thing. And yeah, I still really enjoy, and I'm still rediscovering those stories now.
Mm.
So it's still an inspiration for
Yeah.
the kind of writing that I want to do and the kind of stories I enjoy listening to
Yeah.
and telling. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I totally resonate with that because I mean, I've probably read more crime fiction over the last kind of 10 years than I have in most of my life, or growing up would watch some Sherlock Holmes stuff on television, things like that. I grew up in the States, so crime TV is a very different kind of beast over there than it is here. Here you have, like I said, the Granada stuff, you have the Poirot stuff, you have Murder She Wrote, all that. In the States, it's like, oh, you got Columbo and Basil Rathbone, Sherlock Holmes. you know,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a number of writers who I can think of who don't necessarily come from the tradition, don't come from a long background of loving a particular form of crime fiction, and then but they still sort of write that. I know that yeah, I mean, some of the early, I'm a big hard boiled detective guy, like Raymond Chandler, stuff like that, and they would read a little bit of some stuff, but I know there was a lot of stuff that he refused to read, because he just didn't want to. Um, yeah, so I relate to that. I don't think you need to be like steeped in some of that stuff, but it is fun to re-explore, and I think maybe it might be more fun to explore it now without the nostalgia behind it, maybe. Um, so let's talk about your protagonist, Bertie. Um, where did you come up with the idea? Where did he come from?
I feel like we shouldn't look too closely at him because, yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm a bit. I originally thought I'd end up writing plays and musicals, and that never happened. So I don't know if I'm trying to live my life through this character a little bit. But I
We
like
all
I s-
are. We all are.
exactly. But I think, yeah, he popped into my head because obviously you're always looking for a way to get into these murder mysteries and how the
Mm.
characters get involved. And obviously, I was just reading Robert Thorogood's book, and he's got a crossword setter in his, and who is it? Tom Mead's got an illusionist, and obviously Jonathan
Yes.
Creek was an illusionist. You're
Yes.
always looking for someone that's kind of got a bit of skill in that area.
Yeah.
So I thought, why not a murder mystery playwright? And like I said, I'm
Mm.
sort of in love with a lot of Agatha Christie's plays, and I think
Mm.
some of her best work actually is in her plays, because
Mm.
they've got a wicked sense of humor in them, and she was, quite a wicked funny lady a lot of the
Yeah.
time. And I think sometimes that doesn't come across in the books, because sometimes I think she begrudged writing those books, but she loved writing the plays, so you really
Mm.
get to see her personality. So there's a few little Agatha Christie traits that are in Bertie, kind of like the shyness,
Mm-hmm.
a bit. That's all incorporated in him a little bit. And then to get him involved in the murder proper, I felt like I had to have him friends with a police detective,
Mm.
with a bit of history going. Something's going on there. We're not quite sure yet.
Yeah.
Um, but what I really wanted to do was avoid that kind of murder mystery trope where you have, the really smart amateur and the really stupid policeman. Um,
Yes.
Hugh himself is also a really competent, very good, top of his game policeman. So actually, to bring them together and to work as equals was
Mm.
kind of really important to me. You've got Bertie's specialist knowledge of kind of the theatre area, and then you've got Hugh's crime solving ability as well. And to kind
Mm-hmm.
of mix those together, I thought would be a bit more of a kind of a fresh take on that relationship that's done so many times, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you've got,
Yeah.
whether it's in Sherlock Holmes or Poirot with Jap,
Yeah.
that relationship's been done. So I was trying to let's try and find something else there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like in one level it's kind of disappointing that the legacy of Sherlock Holmes is kind of tainted with this idea that Watson is a bumbling idiot, because that's all down to the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce movies in the 1940s, and then that just carries on in different incarnations and in different ways. The Jeremy Brett films, I think, are the best adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, because they kind of they played that straight. But that said, you are right. Even in Conan Doyle's writing, Lestrade is a dumbass. Like Holmes has an affection for him a little bit, but ultimately, the Metropolitan Police in general are just utterly useless and buffoons. So I do like that. I do like it when things are a bit more, maybe a bit more balanced, with that stuff. And again, you're writing this as this is a historical piece. This isn't contemporary, which is another fascinating aspect of that. So you're kind of going, and it's not dissimilar, I think, in ways that what I did a little bit with the book I wrote for my PhD, and that was it was hard boiled novel. I went back to like the 1920s when this stuff was coming out, and I was trying to play with and subtly kind of do some versions with stuff that are really quite typical of that. And I think this is another fun way of going back to the 1930s golden age stuff, but not having the cheesy, goofy, bumbly policeman versus the well-to-do posh amateur detective. So I like that. I think that's a really cool thing to do. I'm curious. So for you, what you know you grew up, kind of maybe watching crime fiction and seeing crime in plays and stuff like that, more so than maybe reading the books, if I'm understanding properly. Um, what do you think the role of crime fiction is within society?
It's You have cozy crime,
Mm.
and not all crime is. But how to put this? Even if it's not cozy crime, all crime is cozy to me
Mm.
anyway. I
Interesting.
think it's all of it is, whether it's down that kind of fluffy end of cozy crime, which I don't mean in a derogatory way. I
Yes,
really
yes.
enjoy some of
You're
those
gonna get
books.
all these cozy people coming
Yeah,
after you now for
exactly.
saying that.
But Amazon has, it's got murder mystery, the
Yeah.
arts and crafts section. It's
Mm.
kind of fun stuff down there, which is really
Yeah.
fun to read. But then the other end, you've got the hard hitting crime thrillers, and then you've
Yes.
got this huge swath in the middle as well. But what they all do, I think, is reflect our world. Now, the cozy stuff does a kind of, nicer version of our world. It's kind of
Yeah.
a romanticized version of our world.
Absolutely.
The other end, it may be a bit dark, a bit
Yeah.
depressing, but a lot of it, it's a reflection of our world.
Mm.
But what the difference is in these books, which is different to real life, is there's always a sense of fairness and justice.
Mhm. Mhm.
Justice is always done in
Yeah.
some way, and that's the comfort in these books. A lot of readers, classically, as we know from the golden age, were women. But
Mm.
whenever I go to crime events, it's women and lots of gay men a lot of the time, but queer people
Yeah.
really. And I
Yeah.
always want, why is that? And it's the
Yeah.
same in like sci-fi comic book events, perhaps maybe Doctor Who, and
Yeah.
they have this same drive of justice and fairness in them. In
Yeah.
Doctor Who, justice is always done.
Yeah.
In comic books,
Yeah.
the superhero always comes out triumphant. And in crime, the killer is always caught. And I
Yes.
think we find that comforting in those kind of minority groups, I guess,
Mm.
because we're the people that justice and fairness is often denied to.
Yeah.
So they're cozy for me in
Yeah.
that way, especially,
Yeah.
in the current world where
Oh
people
God, yes.
do seem to be getting away with murder sometimes.
Yeah. Yes.
That
Yes.
can't happen in a
Yeah.
crime book, even if
Yeah.
they're not brought to justice through the courts or in jail, they're brought to justice in some way, always.
Yes. Yeah. I always think of one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes short stories is the Augustus Milverton story, who's the master blackmailer. He's blackmailing some people, and it gets the police basically don't ever get him, and Sherlock Holmes and Watson at the end of the story. So spoiler alert for this 100-year-old short story. Um, they're gonna go and kind of expose him and do some, kind of set him straight. And as they go to do that, they see a veiled figure in the room with him who fires a gun and kills him. And it turns out to be one of the women that he was blackmailing. She just eventually just had enough of it and just took him off the board. It's fun because even if you're not getting official justice, you're not getting, the police coming in and arresting the guy, they're going to trial, even in the golden agey stuff, that you do get that sense. It's I think it was Julian Simeons who said that like golden age stuff is like a fairy tale. You have your dragons and they're gonna get slain. The darker stuff, and I also kind of agree with you you're saying that there is a sense of all crime is a little bit cozy in a way, and it made me think of Raymond Chandler because he harshly, really harshly criticizes Dorothy Sayer, in his essay "The Simple Art of Murder." And I kind of don't really blame him for it though, because she kind of flippantly says at one point that, crime, this crime fiction stuff isn't meant to be taken serious. It's just escapism. It's blah 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 blah. But his kind of response to that, well, all literature is a form of escape. Which is really what you were just saying there, and I really agree with that. Whether it's you're into the hard stuff or you're into the cozy stuff, or you could just be a mathematician who want to read a good math book. Like that is some form of an escape in and of itself. If it's something you enjoy reading, it's going to be an escape, and that doesn't. Because I always get a little. I don't. What's your thoughts when people always talk when people talk about crime fiction in the form of escape, but in a derogatory sense, like, oh, it's just I just want to turn my mind off and da 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 da. Because I've never really liked that. I've always found that kind of insulting because it's like escapism is fine, but I don't think that justifies like turning your brain off. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I could sometimes think a lot of those comments where people are like, "Oh, it's just crime fiction. It's just a who done it,
Yeah.
whatever." A lot of those again come from they probably haven't read a murder mystery book or
Yeah.
any of these books recently. Again, they're misremembering what they took away from these books in their youth, which probably was the puzzle and probably was,
Mm,
some of the stereotypical characters, I suppose,
yeah.
that be in books back then. That's what they remember, the cludification of it,
Yeah.
in a way. Whereas, like, yeah, if you do read crime fiction now, it's one of my favorite genres to read, but also it has developed with time. But I think all books have developed with time. No longer they really did need to be not fluffy in the golden age, but a lot
Mm,
of them had to be cozy because we really wanted that comfort
Oh
during that
yes,
time.
definitely.
Whereas now I think they really can be more of a mirror on the world, exactly
Mm,
like, and that's what, proper literary fiction is
yeah,
all about, is kind of shining a window on this world and looking at it in a different way.
yeah,
Crime fiction does that brilliantly. And actually, crime fiction always delves into the darkest parts of
yeah,
society. It has to, it's
yeah,
murder.
yeah.
So I don't think you can ever, and I know we still have, cozy TV programs that do take
Yes,
murder lightly,
we
but
have our death
really,
in
I
paradises.
exactly. But it's like, but I don't think you ever can take murder lightly, even in,
Yeah,
even in shows like Death in Paradise. It's still a life that's been
yeah,
lost. What
yeah.
what's more serious than that in a way?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's one of the it's a subtle there's a subtle difference, maybe not so subtle actually. The difference I think then is between like the hard stuff and the cozy stuff is that yeah, there's like say Death in Paradise. Yeah, there is a dead body and they want to bring justice for that. But the I guess the trick is that the with the Death in Paradise sort of formula, those things are the body is there to sort of facilitate the mystery, and the person, it's the crime that is the bad thing, and the thing that is focused on. I do think there might be a sense of there is a lack of who that person is though within golden agey sort of stuff, which I think, as you were saying, as things have progressed and updated in times, you kind of get a bit more character to the person that is the corpse on the floor. They're not just, in some books, not all books, but in some kind of contemporary cozy stuff, there is a bit more sort of that actually is a person. It's not just the trick to get people in. You said something interesting a second ago about kind of the crime fiction being this the mirror and looking at the darkness of our society. Now I mentioned that your book is historical crime, which is really fascinating to me. Again, my PhD book was historical crime. So you set yours in the 1930s, and I'm wondering what was the reason for that? What was the appeal of going back to that point in time?
Well, for me, it's because I am just fascinated with that theatre history, and I
Yeah.
wanted to, the plan is that all these books are going to be set in theatres or theatre locations that are now lost. So
Wow.
going back to the 30s is a chance for me to not only geek out and do some research about theatres, but to bring
Yeah.
those back to life on the page, which is important for me, I think. It's theatres are such special places,
Mm,
and once they're gone, they're gone.
yeah.
um, because we don't, I know it's that awful thing people always say, but we don't build theatres like we used to. They
No.
absolutely, those Victorian Edwardian theatres, they absolutely nailed it.
Yeah.
And like I said, they don't feel empty. They feel great. You go into a
Mm.
modern theatre, does feel a bit, clinical.
Yeah.
Not, it doesn't have that same atmosphere. Whatever it
Yeah.
is in that architecture of that time. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I kind of want to go to the 30s. But also the reason I want to go there as well is I'm not an expert in police procedure, in forensics,
Mm,
all that stuff. And actually, in that golden age era, you can kind of, it's very rudimentary kind of
yeah.
forensics. It's fingerprints on things. There's no DNA evidence. There's no iPads to put
Yeah.
evidence in, like all that kind of stuff, which I find fascinating reading about sometimes. And some people are really brilliant at putting that procedure in their book. And when it's done well,
Yeah.
I find it really adds to the tension because you've got to follow this procedure. Really, when it's done well, it really improves a book using that stuff. But I don't know anything about that. So
Yeah.
it was good to go to a place that was comfortable for me, which is this theatre history and that more kind of golden age style of who done it, where we're looking for clues and talking to people and kind of trying to get into their minds to find out why they did something.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Was there a social aspect of a social commentary aspect of also wanting to go back to the 30s? Because you've got an interesting protagonist. You have a there's he's Bertie's a gay man, 1930s. It's a very complicated time. that's gonna you can do all sorts of really interesting social commentary within this series. Was that something that you wanted to do? Was it something that was just kind of it just sort of happened as a happy coincidence? What was the motive behind that?
Like I said, he sort of arrived like that. But I am
Mm,
fascinated. I'm so fascinated with gay and queer history
mm,
because um, it's incredibly, it's really weird.
yeah,
What we think that queer history was in the 30s wasn't what we thought it was at all. You know, queerness
yeah,
is having this full circle moment right now. In the
yeah,
30s, queerness was people that were acting a bit outside their gender stereotype. In that
yes,
Lucy Worsley documentary about Agatha Christie was referred to as a queer woman because she
mm,
didn't fit the female stereotypes of the era. She was a lot
yeah,
more, stronger, I guess,
yeah,
than that. She would stand up to the men in a way.
yeah,
Um, so that's what queerness was really about back then. It was
mm,
gendered stereotypes. So when
yeah,
we come to today and people are saying, "Oh, the trans movement has nothing to do with gay people," it's ridiculous because
yeah,
it was entirely that right from the
mm,
beginning, and it was a lot more about the men that would go out wearing makeup and
mm,
dressing slightly different and referring
yeah,
to each other as she, all that kind of stuff. Those
yeah,
were the people that were the targets at
yeah,
that point. And actually, if you were, I suppose, what we called straight acting, if you didn't present
mm,
those kind of things publicly,
mm,
you were really under the radar in the 1930s.
mm,
And even though people did get arrested
yeah,
and all that stuff, and it was illegal at that time, it
mm,
wasn't really until after the Second World War, the 50s and 60s, where it got to that kind of gay crisis fever
yeah,
pitch,
yeah,
leading to Stonewall and all of that, and the gay revolution
yeah,
at that point. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to play with because it's quite possible to a lot of people of the era that Bertie isn't even gay at all. He's just,
yeah,
a bachelor. It doesn't stand out in the same way.
yeah,
And it's really fun to play around with those expectations because for a modern audience reading this, Hugh and Bertie, like their relationship is incredibly thinly drawn in the book,
mm,
but people get it straight away. They're like, "Oh, there's something going on here."
yeah,
Whereas actually
yeah,
in the 1930s, I don't think readers would even notice that
yeah.
in a way. So it's incredibly fun to do that, but it's also a bit of a challenge because you've got to balance what was real back then with the expectations now, and that's
Yes.
kind of a bit of a fine line to tread sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. No, I think you've done a really interesting thing with this book. I really like that. I really like what's going on. Um, again, so kind of carrying on from that though, I guess for you writing this book within the theater land was just kind of a no brainer for you because because of your love for theater, your love for history of theater. Um, yeah, so I'm curious then about more about your research process then. So how do you go about? Because you're writing this during the endless lockdown that we had a couple of years ago. What was that? How do you go back and explore these lost theaters? How did you pick this particular theater for your book and whatnot?
Well, this one was just, yeah, this one came out of the pier, so it was the perfect kind of
Yeah.
place. And actually, that kind of, like I said, that closed circle end of the pier mechanics sort of doesn't really come into this murder at all.
Mm,
But obviously the theatre does. And I was really lucky
yeah.
that I was able to go to the Keep in Brighton, which was still open. That's like
Mm,
their archives.
yeah.
And it was all, socially distanced and stuff. And there was
Mm,
a lot of, you had to order all your things in advance so they could be
yeah.
quarantined and all this kind of stuff. But they had plans of this theatre. They had pictures of the theatre on the inside shortly before it was demolished. So it was a really
Yeah.
great resource. And actually, there was someone that had a handwritten account, and it was so annoying because the handwriting was so bad I couldn't interpret some of it.
Oh
But there
God,
were
yes.
there were a few little details in there that were great to kind of use. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, because I work in theatre, I'm quite good at looking at, scenery plans, whatever, and imagining what the final thing looks like. So I could look at those plans and sort of visualize what this theatre might have looked like.
Yeah.
Again, helped by the fact that there were some pictures, and it also the theatre appears in a few brief shots in Oh What a Lovely War, which was filmed in Brighton. So
Okay.
the pier exteriors were filmed on the West Pier, which is no longer, that's the one that's just a load of scrap iron
Yeah.
in the water at the moment. But the theatre interiors were filmed in the Palace Pier Theatre. So we've actually got some of that on film.
Very
It's a real few brief glimpses of it, but I was stopping it, screenshotting it to have a little poke around. But the other thing about theatres is they're all quite similar. The way theatres work, little things like the way they smell, they sort of smell of rope and burning dust a lot of the time.
Yeah.
All of these things haven't changed for years. And the theatre
Yeah.
techniques we use, I work in a very modern department, which is automation, which is all kind of motorized scenery and stuff. But the actual stage machinery we power and we use hasn't changed for hundreds of years. It still revolves, it's still counterweight flying, it's still floor tracks, all these things that have been around forever. So I was really kind of comfortable kind of taking my best guess at what the theatre would have been like at that time, because I feel like you can do all your research, but you've really got to take your best guess at stuff. And because I've been immersed in theatre my entire life and worked in it for ages, that's kind of just part of me. It's really natural to be able to do that. And I think for any author, you're always kind of looking for the thing that you can bring to a book. Anyone can. So that's why, the lawyers write great books and retired police detectives write great books, because they've got all that experience. But, even if you work in Tesco's or you're a barista in Starbucks or whatever, there's probably some bit of inside knowledge that from that place that you can spin into a story that's so authentic. The way the processes are done. In the publishing world, obviously there's quite a few books that are set in bookshops or all those things, or behind the scenes of publishing worlds again. But again, that insight that you don't even think you have sometimes, just from your day-to-day life, can be really fascinating. So again, if that's your experience, use that to write whatever story you want to tell, because it's going to bring so much authenticity to it.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think some of the best written stuff is when you can tell either the person has really done their research, or they have been immersed in that world and they can bring it to life the best. You can always tell when someone's sort of half-assing it, and most of the time I think most of the time you see that on screen, maybe more than you do in books, but you do still see it in books. I'm curious about the kind of your journey to getting published, because one of the things I like to do with this podcast is sort of be a bit real about the some people have really easy experiences, some people have difficult experiences, some people have middle of the road experience. So I'm curious about your road from finishing the book to, did you get an agent? How did you get, what was that journey like? What was it easy? Was it hard? What were the challenges? I want to dive into that.
Well, it's quite easy for me because I'm sort of a relentlessly positive person. So I've gone into this the whole time with no expectations, which sounds really negative, but it's not. I think a lot of
Very
people
smart.
start out from the point of view going, I've written a book and it should be published, and everyone that turns me down is, somehow hates me, or, they're against this thing that should. And it's like, well, no, you've written something along with, especially during lockdown, along with thousands and thousands of other people that were doing the same thing. So you're kind of not special in that way. So you've really got to go into it. And every time I sent out to an agent, sometimes you don't get a response. Sometimes you get a template response back, and sometimes you get a response where there's just a few words, and you're like, well, you've read it. And to me, that was hugely positive. Someone's actually read my 3 chapters.
True, yeah.
It's fantastic. But during that time, I was also looking at self-publishing or indie author, which is what we kind of call it now. And the more I was looking into that, I was like, oh, this looks really fun, because I'm a bit of
Mm.
a, not a business geek, but I like that kind of side of things.
Yeah.
The kind of, and there's a few things that are in my wheelhouse that I can do, like,
Mm.
the layout and a bit of graphic design. I'm not a graphic designer by any stretch, but I
Yeah.
can do layout and
Yeah.
typography and typesetting and all that stuff. That is something I can do. So the more it went on and the more I looked into it, I was like, oh, that does look quite fun. So I
Mm.
sort of set an end date, which was January, I think. And I was
Mm.
like, if I don't get an agent by January, if it doesn't get picked up, I'm going to start the process myself of
Cool.
going towards publishing it myself, even if I
Yeah.
do keep submitting it here and there, which
Yeah. Sure.
involves getting developmental edits, getting it copy edited, all that stuff. I was like,
Yes.
I need to do this exactly the same process that a publisher would do if I want
Absolutely.
that final end quality.
God. Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
more it approached that end cutoff date, I was like, oh, you know what? I don't want to get picked up by an agent. I was sort of had my fingers crossed that no one would get back to me, say, yes, we would like to represent it in a weird
Yeah.
way. Um, so so yeah, it did get to that cut off, and I went through that whole publishing process, and I really took my time over it. The
Mm.
cutoff was in January, and I didn't get the book out until October, because
Mm.
again, I knew this was like my one chance at
Yeah.
doing a debut.
Yeah.
The quality of the
Wait.
final product, the quality of the book
Yeah.
needed to be really good.
Oh yeah.
So I really made sure I spent my time making sure it was, and hopefully that's reflected in the final product. It's, even though people did get in touch and say, oh, there's a typo on page, whatever, as people do, but I was like, it feels to me, and the people that have read it, it feels to me that like it is, a genuine book, which I know it's a bit of imposter syndrome, isn't it, when you do something yourself, because it feels a bit like a cheat code, doesn't it? It's like, well,
Yes.
I
Yes.
didn't get it published, but I did every step in the process. And a few for friends of mine that have been traditionally published are almost jealous in a way, because they're like,
Mm.
oh, the amount of control, and actually the fact that you can push it in a way that a publisher can't when it's one of 50
Yes.
books they've released that month. So it is, yeah, it's kind of been a weird journey, but it's been a really positive one. And
Yeah.
everyone I've met along the way, the agents that have given me advice, a few people from the publishing world
Mm.
have given me advice, all the book bloggers that came along with me and were like supporting me during
Yes.
that process,
Yeah.
that road up to publication,
Yeah.
have all been fantastic. So when I do see people online moaning about, how awful it is trying to get your book published, I'm just like,
Yeah.
just set your expectations in a slightly different way and approach it. If you approach it in a positive way, like I said, this experience has been overwhelmingly positive
Yes.
for me. So I'm really hoping that that continues. Really,
Yeah, I mean, to look at your book, I wanted to get it. I got it on my Kindle, so I don't have the physical copy to hold up. But I just re-looking at the cover design and everything. Like, there's everything about the way this has been done. Like, it really does match and rival. I think traditionally published stuff. And I think you said something really important a second ago, and that was if you're going to do it, you have to do all the things a traditional publisher would do: developmental edits, all that kind of stuff. um I remember, I don't know if you've ever been to the Mark Dawson big event that he does at South Bank in London. I went to one of his little conferences a couple of years ago. I'll never go again, for reasons. But one of the things that was really interesting to me was the level of I'm gonna be really mean for a minute. Sorry, world. But there was a level of arrogance that I would say was quite ignorant from some of the people that they were bringing up on stage. There were a couple of authors, a duo team, who they write their own books, they self-edit and all that kind of stuff. And I instantly went on my phone and looked on Amazon and pulled it up, and it was not good. It was not good writing. It was overwritten. It was clunky. It was like, yeah, this painfully needs an editor, painfully. And I think what you're saying by you go out there, you do the things that Trad would do, because why not? Because it's they don't do these things just for fun. You know what I mean? Like developmental edits and structural edit. That's not just for fun. That's because writing a good story takes time, and it takes a bunch of different people with unique particular skills that are really all there to help you make your story better. So yeah, I'm totally with you on the importance of needing to do that, because if you don't, I think it reflects in a very bad way. And also, I mean, you're crushing it. I mean, there's like, what, you got 137 reviews on Amazon, man. That's fantastic. There's, and again, I think you've put so much great work. I love the cover. The cover just nails it. It's fun because your cover sort of falls into the what you sort of come to expect from what would be a cozy. Like, you see, like, oh, this is kind of gives you the idea of what it is, and that's really what a cover is kind of meant to do. It gives you a sense of you've done it, but you've done it in a way that doesn't feel like a Richard Osman imitation. Like everything kind of imitates his style now. You got the other guy who writes the Death in or created Death in Paradise. He has books, and they look exactly the same. You wouldn't know that it was a different person, but like yours, it's just nicely done. Terrific cover, terrific book. We need to wrap up in a minute, but I still want to go. I want to ask a few more questions about your time working in theater, because I find that, again, a really fascinating aspect of what you do. So you've been working in theater for 15 years, and you say you work in the automation, the moving, the motorized scenery and stuff like that. For people at home who don't know what you mean by that, explain what you do. When you're at the office.
Yeah, it's tough to explain because theatre's still a real mixture of stuff, and over time things have become more and more automated. So you can sort of say, when you go and see a show, any scenery that you see moving around on stage is likely automated these days. It's got a motor attached to it, and it's being controlled by me sitting at an automation desk operating it, and it comes on and off, and you replay some cues. But lots of shows still, sometimes that is just a person backstage pulling a rope as well. So there is still this mixture of really traditional theatre stuff with the modern, as well. But it's quite it's a newish field. Automation only really came in a proper way in the 90s, although there were forerunners in the mega musicals. It was hydraulics, but it was still very much manual. A lot of that Miss Saigon, it was a person with a joystick literally flying a helicopter around. They were always proud in their marketing of that original production of Miss Saigon that the helicopter lands differently every night. It's so real. Well, of course, they couldn't land it exactly the same every night because it was completely manual. There would always be an element of something different in it. So yeah, it's kind of fun. But as time goes on, when I started, automation would generally be reserved for huge pieces of scenery. So on Sound of Music, we had a huge 10-ton tilting mountain that was automated because it had to be. There was no other way of moving it. Or on Priscilla, we had a huge bus that weighed 10 tons that drove around the stage. Or I'm trying to, I'm thinking of all these things that are huge bits of scenery. On the original Sunset Boulevard, they had a huge house. Everything was huge and massive. But these days, it's used for a lot more things, because when you control where something is, you can do other things like project onto it. And a lot of shows these days utilize a lot of projection. So because we're in control of where something is, and we can tell the video department, over a network where it is, they can track these things, and it comes together to produce these effects in the last 5 years that were just not possible before. So it's still constantly evolving. Theatre's still constantly evolving. And, especially in the UK, like I said, those huge Victorian melodramas at Drury Lane, we've
Mm.
always been on the edge of theatre
Yeah.
engineering and always pushing it to try and take it to that next place. And that's still going on now, which is,
Yeah.
it's great to continue that tradition.
Definitely. I agree. I'm what's you've been in this industry for a very long time. So what's one of the plays that you are the most proud to have been involved in?
It's Sunset Boulevard, which we
Mm.
just did. And I've got to say, this show has probably the least amount of automation I've ever done on it. It has one
Right.
thing that flies in and out. It probably does it about 8 times in the show. It's the
Yeah.
simplest thing I've ever programmed in my life. At the beginning of the year, I did Ain't Too Proud, and that had, 250 automation cues.
Mm.
Sunset Boulevard had 8. But that show and just how fresh and brilliant it is. I mean, I love Sunset Boulevard anyway. It's one of my favorite shows. And the fact that they can do that show and strip everything away from it and it
Mm.
still works is fantastic. And it's just, I always think about shows. It's kind of the opposite of what I do, because we do the big blockbuster shows. We do
Yeah.
the shows with the huge bits of set, but sometimes there's nothing better than really stripping it back
Yeah.
and doing something small,
Yeah.
but when it's done so well with such
Yeah.
incredible performers,
Mm.
it's still blockbuster. You don't
I
need the
agree.
stuff, you know what I mean?
Totally agree.
And like I was saying, going right back to what we were saying at the beginning about books where you have to use your imagination to fill in the gaps. When you
Yeah.
do see a show that has very little to it,
Mm.
you as an audience member can fill in the gaps. You can
Yes.
imagine the rest of the scenery. You can imagine the glamorous costumes if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
And you can create your own version of that show. And I think that's
Definitely.
why people relate to it. It makes you sit up and pay attention to it, as
Yeah.
opposed to, a big musical. You can just sit there and let it all wash over you. It's all done for you.
Yeah.
When you're asked to imagine things, when you're asked to engage,
Yeah.
um, it's magic. And yeah, I could go on about it all day, but yeah, like I said, the least amount of automation that I've ever done, but 100% the best show I've ever been involved in. Yeah.
Fantastic. What we can do is we'll bring you back for a show all about theater,
Yeah.
Because two of my favorite plays that come to mind, and maybe these are cliches, I don't know, but I love them. In terms of stripped backness that you mentioned, is I really loved The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. I loved that play. I thought that was just so well done. I think I saw it like 2 or 3 times. Loved it. And then I also really liked Neil Gaiman's Ocean at the End of the Lane. I saw it when it was in previews at the National. Yeah. So I don't know what they changed or how much changed when they brought it to the West End, but those are both very, very stripped back. There's not a lot going on. It's mostly just, you know, people on stage, lines. You are making up a lot of the background, and I love that. I totally agree with you that sometimes less is more. I mean, I've seen like Wicked. I don't really like Wicked. I'm not gonna lie. If someone worked on Wicked, a lot of hard work goes into it. But I found myself most interested by the mechanical dragon, and I'm like, that's probably not what they want me to take away from this this play. But there's so much stuff. But like, yeah, the ones that stand out to me were these smaller ones. But it would be great to have you back on to talk more about the secrets of the theater world. Could be quite fun. But yeah, Jamie, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on the podcast today. Where can people find you on social media if you want them to?
So on social media, my handle is This Is Jamie West, pretty much everywhere. So yeah,
Cool.
and like you said, on TikTok, I do some fun little history videos every now and then. That's probably where I'm most interesting, I suppose. On Instagram, it's a lot more book stuff. I kind of post about all the books I've been reading, which is quite a lot these days. I've got some gaps in between my queues at work where I can read a book, so I'm ramping up the book count again. But I've also got a website which is jamiewest.co.uk. Which probably could do some updating, to be fair, but you can sign up to my little mailing list there. And as soon as the second book is done and out, I'll let you know straight away, because it's taking a bit longer than I was hoping, but it's going to be here one day. And yeah, if you want to know, be the first to know when it's coming out. Yeah, jump on that mailing list.
Good. Hey, you don't want to rush it. You don't want to rush it. You know, when the book is ready, the book is ready. I totally get that. Yeah, anyone who's listening, by the way, there are links to Jamie's website to buy his book, all that kind of stuff, in the description of this video, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on Spotify or Apple. All the links will be there. So make sure you go buy Death on the Pier, sign up for his mailing list, and check out Jamie's social media. It's great stuff. Until next time, we will see you later. Bye bye.
The Secret Shopper.